ready with their friends in the local community getting together to huddle around their computer screens to watch this. I just need to make sure that I wouldn't want to, delay their time or upset their timing. Okay, let's make a start. Welcome, everybody. My name is David Nicholson. I'm the chair of the Worcestershire Acute Hospitals NHS Trust. This is a board meeting in public, hence we're using YouTube in order to communicate with a wider population that we have. It's one every 2 months board meetings. We have a shorter board meeting where we focus predominantly on performance of the organisation, and this is one of those. So it is a shorter board meeting as far as everyone's concerned. But all of our board meetings, we start off with either a patient or staff story. And today is no different. Can I welcome Jazz Cartwright to the meeting? Jazz has recently been elected as the chair of the BAME network. So welcome, Jazz. This month is a particularly important month for the Trust on all sorts of levels, but particularly because we are focusing our attention throughout the month on identifying and promoting a positive culture for the organisation. And there are a series of elements to that, and one of them is Black History Month, but also we're focusing on inequality, on staff speaking up, and also the inclusive way in which we want to develop our culture based on our forward programme. So we thought it was really essential that we, now that our BAME network is up and running, that we should have at the earliest opportunity the possibility of spending a bit of time at the board talking to the leadership of that. So again, welcome, Jazz. It's particularly important, I think, for this organisation. I know over the last few years, a number of chairs and chief executives have tried to focus their attention on the diversity of our population, but more importantly for us anyway, the diversity of our staff. We haven't been very successful in terms of making as much progress as we might have done over the last few years, but we think certainly that 2 or 3 things have come together to give us a real opportunity to push this whole agenda forward. The whole COVID issue really did focus our attention on the extra risks that our BAME members of staff were taking in terms of dealing with COVID. And we did a lot of work to get a proper risk assessment and proper things in place to adequately protect our staff during that period. But it really did focus, I think, all of our attention on that. And secondly, the whole Black Lives Matters project brought very sharply into focus the importance of these issues for a board like ours in an environment that we operate. So we try to support and help the development of a BAME network, enable that to happen. Tina has been particularly as leading in all of this. And Tina, I think, is now going to introduce this element of our meeting and introduce Jazz. Tina.
Thank you, Chair. So I won't repeat some of the points that you've raised already, but the staff networks we see is a really key part of our culture journey. From the setting up the BAME network, which Jazz will talk through in a minute, but we're also working with our LGBT colleagues and disability colleagues and having similar networks in the organisation. Every single person employed by us has a voice and feels they're able to shape the organisation going forward. So Jazz Cartwright, we went through an election process, and Jazz was nominated by members of the BAME network, and she's going to spend the next 15 minutes on the following three items. First of all, to give us an update on what the network's been up to since it was formed at the end of June. She set the exec team a challenge, and we're going to hear from Vicky Morris and Vicky Lewis on the response to that. Support the BAME network needs from the board. So I'll hand over to Jazz now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. And colleagues, thank you for inviting the BAME network to come and talk to you today. So as Sir David and Tina have said, the network sort of came about in June. So prior to that, we didn't have a BAME network in the organisation. And as we've said, I was elected in September, and we've now got 2 vice chairs in place and 3 task and finish group leads in place, and they were nominated in October. And then can I just echo thanks to Tina and to Richard Haynes, who are both really supportive of the work we're doing and supporting me as chair as well. As a network, our aim's really simple, and Sir David alluded to it as well. And we want to work in an organisation and help create a culture where all staff and patients, regardless of their race or ethnicity, feel supported, cared for, and are treated with dignity, kindness and respect. I don't think that's too much to ask. We all expect it every day when we come into work, and it should be no different for our BAME colleagues. And our mantra is quite simple. It's about if getting it right for BAME colleagues, if we can do that over the coming months, over the coming year, then we can get it right for all of our staff and all of our patient groups and all of our visitors. If we were to look at our population and we go, well, okay, in terms of how representative are we as an organisation in terms of our population, we tick the box. 7.6% of our population of Worcestershire are from a BAME background, and that's based on the 2011 census. I'm sure that will change next year because I've been living in Worcester for 18 years now, and I can see the demographic changing over the time that I've been here. And as an organisation of 6,500 staff, we have 17% of our colleagues are from a BAME background. That's 1,097 colleagues that are either Black, Asian, or from a minority ethnic background. And I was quite surprised when I saw those figures. But if you were to look at the fact, so we tick the box, we are representative of our population, so that's brilliant. But if we dig a bit deeper and we look at the facts around that group, then we just need to reflect a little bit. So if we were to look at the 1920 staff survey that 249 BAME colleagues completed last year, we've got 23 BAME colleagues who are band 8 and above in this organisation. We look at the trust board and our senior executives and look at the diversity that we present as a group. 23.9% of our BAME colleagues said that they'd experienced bullying and harassment at their time at work, which is higher than the national average. BAME staff are 1.53 times more likely to enter a disciplinary process and more likely to be disciplined, which is worse than the national average. And lots of colleagues on the gallery over the last week have witnessed, and I've heard on the network, and have heard testimonies from our staff who've been courageous enough to step forward and put their hand up and say, look, this is the experience that I've had in this organisation over the last 12 months. And I've been shocked by some of that, and I know that my colleagues have been shocked by some of that, but at least we're hearing it now, whereas before maybe we weren't. So at least we've got something to work with as an organisation and go, as Sir David said, you know, this isn't the place that we want going forward, and we need to work to sort of address it going forward. So as a network, we've prioritised 3 areas for action that help us look at those staff survey figures and the feedback that we're hearing from our colleagues. So the 3 areas that we want your support on is around support and advocacy. So we want to create a safe environment where people and our staff, patients, visitors, can raise concerns about where they're not being treated fairly by their manager, by their team leader or colleagues around them, or even patients. And we want to be able to help managers deal with those concerns that are being raised, because it's quite difficult, isn't it? Sometimes when you're faced with a member of staff who's going, oh, I'm feeling like this. We need to give our managers the toolkit that they need to be able to deal with those in a safe way and a supported way. We know, based on 23 of our BAME colleagues being 18 and above, that there's a glass ceiling. It's hard to get into this organisation, and when you're in it, it's hard to break above that. I've been here 18 years, and it's been difficult to go further. That's not to say that we can't, but it's about how do we attract the best, how do we keep the best, and how do we help those staff who want to reach their potential. That's not a lot to ask. From a training and education perspective, we know that there's a lot of work we need to do. So we all know that we all have unconscious and conscious biases. We all have them. And I think it would be remiss of us, any one of us, to say that we don't. So it's about how do we educate ourselves about what our own internal biases are, and how when we come to work, we need to think a bit differently, be conscious of our biases. And how do we help our managers and our staff recognise and value diversity and what that can bring to our organisation. So those task and finish groups will be working through very shortly, and they've been set objectives to try and deliver by December and by the end of March. And one of those exercises was around our exec colleagues talking to their BAME colleagues. So as Tina says, if I can hand it over to Vicky Norris and Vicky Lewis in terms of their reflections and feedbacks, that'd be really great. Thank you.
Do you want me to go through, Vicky? Okay, so if I just start off, because I was very, I think we all received at the board a letter from Lorraine Mahatchi, which was a diary of a black nurse. So if you reflect back, I think, Jazz, we received this, I think in May, because I used that as an opportunity to, I mean, first of all, the diary was provoking in its thinking. And I think for all of us at the board, I'm sure there was a lot of reflections in terms of what we needed to think about, very much to the points that Jazz has made. But I wanted to professionally follow that up because it was a diary of a black nurse. And I think it was important that Lorraine and I touched base, which we did. It was either sort of end of June, beginning of July. And I was really privileged to hear some of her both personal as well as professional experiences, some of which surprised me and disappointed me in terms of the things that she and her family have had to face. But I think we've both agreed, and we've got some sessions that are coming up. We've had a couple of touch points where we've used Zoom in the current circumstances to catch up and just build on actually our discussion that we've been having. So Lorraine has very kindly agreed to reverse mentor me, which I'm really pleased that she's agreed to do that, which is lovely. So we've got a couple of sessions booked in November. And as part of that, for me, it gives me an opportunity to do some more sessions back to the floor because she works in endoscopy. And so I've got clinical sessions where we can also touch base at the end of those sessions just to be able to look at her work environment and actually understand the challenges that she faces, but also the opportunities. And she's also, I've discussed with her whether she wants the opportunity of being able to shadow me. Jazz's point, because nationally, Ruth May, as the CNO in England, is very clear about that equal opportunities and the visibility of BAME representation across leadership roles. And so affording a sort of two-way process, if you like. So Lorraine is kindly reverse mentoring me. I've provided opportunities for her to shadow me, and then hopefully we can have discussions about opportunities that represents for both of us in terms of actually widening our understanding and looking at actually what other opportunities there are. So I'm really pleased to have touched base with Lorraine. I thank her for the fact that she shared that diary of a black nurse with us, because that stimulated that contact. But it's looking like a really rich relationship, which we can learn from both sides. So I thank her for that. And I'll pass to Vicky.
Thank you, Vicky, much appreciated. So I'm very fortunate to have Giles as part of my senior leadership team in the digital division. And just going back to one of the statistics that Giles talked about, there's only 23 BAME colleagues of a level 8A and above within our organisation. I've actually got Jazz and also Stephen Asante Boachi as part of that 23. Within digital, we have a headcount of 70, and out of that 70, we have 10% of our colleagues that come from a BAME background, and out of that, the majority of those BAME colleagues are actually male, which is probably quite a different mix to elsewhere in the organisation, but probably talks predominantly to that IT background where we see it is quite a male-dominated picture. So we've met as a group of colleagues, and Jazz helped me to facilitate a discussion about experiences within the organisation, experiences of the new and re-established BAME network. And also, like Vicky, we heard about experiences from elsewhere within their lives, and what their families have experienced, and what their children experience. And it was very difficult to hear in some cases. I think the one thing that stood out for me was particularly from a member of my senior team who described going into meetings within the organisation and actually feeling the responsibility and weight of his whole race on his shoulders, because he was there as the only black man, and felt that he had to be very, very polite in all situations and had to just almost be wholly representative of an entire race and didn't want to let that race down. That's a huge burden to shoulder, isn't it? As well as doing your professional job. So it's been a really interesting and eye-opening experience. I think someone on the gallery described it. It's almost like you've had your glasses on and you take glasses off and you clean them and then you put them back on again, and it feels, everything just doesn't quite look the same as you thought it did. I think overwhelmingly the staff were glad the BAME network has been established, and they certainly see the value in that. But going back to that Jazz made, you know, every single member of our staff, our visitors and our patients want to come to work, they want to come to this organisation, feel heard, feel valued, and ultimately I think feel cherished. And I think we need to create an organisation that allows that to happen. Jazz, I know you were part of that discussion. Is there anything that you wanted to add or I've missed?
No, that's great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, do you want to say anything else, Jazz, before I open it up for questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, I'll open it, and yeah, I know this is but not many boards can say we have more people on the board called Vicky than we do have people from a BAME background. That's unusual. We've also got more called Richard as well, but I'll just put that to one side. Any questions that people want to make, or any comments that they feel that they want to make?
Can I offer a comment, please, Chairman?
Yes, sorry, Mark.
Thank you very much. I have had a number of really good conversations with Jazz in her position as chair of the BAME network and in my sort of position as advocacy for the BAME network on the board. And one of the things that I've been discussing with Jazz is to ensure that the BAME network has the knowledge that they are there, as many other things, to try their best to hold the trust board to account. If we as a board are not doing what we say we'll do, following our 4 behaviours with regard to BAME issues, as well as other issues around the equality agenda, then I'm encouraging Jazz and her colleagues to ensure that they hold us to account. Now, if that means that we, on occasions, feel uncomfortable, so be it. On occasions, have our failings or shortfalls brought to our attention, then so be it. But because I think it will make us all the stronger as a board and stronger as a trust. And I think from hearing from Jazz this morning, you can see that I'm delighted that the network have appointed her, because she's grasped the nettle, and I think she will hold us to account. And I wanted to publicly acknowledge that and make sure that we all take on board the fact that the BAME network will be doing that. And I certainly look forward to working very closely with the BAME network to improve the lot of all our employees. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Mark. Any other points people want to make? I've got Colin and then Anita and then Matthew.
Thank you, Chairman. Jazz, thank you very much for sharing your really exceptional thoughts with us, and I look forward to hearing more from you in due course. Your comments provoked some thinking and learning in my mind, certainly, and many of them, too many to raise now, but one of them that particularly struck me was you commented about how our BAME colleagues sometimes don't receive respect and appropriate treatment from our patients. Do you think the organisation gives enough support in those instances?
Thank you for your kind words. No, I don't think we do. I think it's about what's our stance as an organisation where we see poor behaviour, whether it's from colleagues or whether it's from patients. And it's about collective responsibility to each and every one of our members of staff. And what we're hearing is that patients are saying this to our staff, that I don't want to be treated by you because you're Indian. I want someone who's white to look after me. And our colleagues are going, okay, I'll go and find you a white doctor. If we find that's acceptable, then we don't need to do anything. If collectively we find that unacceptable, then it's almost like a zero tolerance to it. But we just need to step up and say, this is where we want to be as an organisation in terms of our culture. So it's about equipping our staff with the right words and feeling that we're behind them in terms of what they feel is an adequate response to our patients, who we feel we need to educate as well. It's a journey for us as an organisation, and it's a journey for our population as well, about how do we treat each other with kindness.
Thanks, Jazz. That's wise words, I think, and I think we'd all associate ourselves with the zero tolerance bit that you described there. Anita.
Yeah, thanks, Sir David. Jazz, so thank you so much. I think you spoke really, really powerfully and eloquently. I'm really pleased that you're chair of the network, and I really look forward to everything you're going to do. I think it's really good that you're here. I think that we're talking about some really important stuff, and one of the things that I think I'm particularly working on at my other trust at NUH is about how do we improve career progression for people from a BAME background, for exactly the reasons you say, because we've actually got a real problem in identifying talent at an early enough stage. To give you an example, at NUH, we're in a situation where there are, like Justice here, there are very few BAME nurses above a band 6. But the average age of those nurses, they're already in their 50s. At that point, there's no way they're going to have time to progress enough to get to a chief nurse position at some point, even if they're good enough. So there's something about identifying talent earlier. One of the things I would like to do, however, is share with the trust. We've actually been doing at NUH some really good research into, across the whole of the recruitment and interview and selection process, what the barriers are to BAME progression, a really powerful piece of research. And I'd like to share that with Tina and Mark and Matthew and David and yourself, because I think it could at least I'm not saying the issues are the same at all trusts, but I think we could find that there could be something quite useful in that. But I read some of this stuff and thought, oh my God, I didn't realise that was an issue too. So I'll share that offline. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Matthew.
Thanks to David, and Jazz. Thanks again for your leadership of this important part of our culture change journey. And you and I know each other quite well over a number of conversations that we've had over some time. And in our conversations, Jazz, we talked about the importance of education, people understanding the experiences of people working and living in the county from a BAME background, but also meaningful action as opposed to warm words. And you'll know that we've committed an executive team to actually get our level of understanding and education up to a much better level than it currently is around the experiences lives of people from a BAME background, and we're in the process of putting that in place. And you and I have been in conversation recently about making sure that we've got a representative from the BAME network involved in senior appointments. So with the Chief Nursing Officer appointment, that's already in place. And again, I think that's meaningful action. And board colleagues, just so that you're aware, I think Jazz sort of alluded to it, but didn't really explicitly describe. We've had through a number of meetings, but particularly the senior leaders briefing last week, a sharing of some really quite distressing and disturbing examples of behaviour of our staff towards each other. And I don't think we should apologise for that. I don't think we should apologise for sharing it, but we absolutely have to act. And I'm hoping that the message from the board around zero tolerance was partly encapsulated in my message on Friday out to the organisation. I've already had a lot of feedback from people saying that was timely and well received. But so David, I wonder if it's time to reiterate the message that we collectively sent out from the board a couple of months ago in relation to the board's position on inclusivity in the widest sense, because we've had examples of racism, sexism, and I'm not sure what the word for this is, but really quite offensive behaviour towards patients as well. So I do think there's something important for us as a board, with Jazz's help, to again set out our stall as an organisation about what we will not tolerate. The support we would need to put in place, obviously, but what we will not tolerate, I think, is really crucial at this time to set out our stall. So thanks again, Jazz, for your leadership in this area, and you know where I am as always.
Thank you, Matthew.
Any other points or questions people want to raise? Vicky, Morris.
Thank you, Sir David. Jazz, I think just what you've been saying about attitude from patients and or staff, I would really welcome some further discussions with the network about actually how we integrate that into the pathway to platinum, because as ever, this comes down to local leadership in its many guises, and actually how we take that zero tolerance. And if I can chat to you early next week, we could agree how we can have that discussion between the network and the Pathway to Platinum group, so that we can look at how we can make sure that that is called out on every single occasion, and that we integrate that into that Pathway to Platinum process. So I'd welcome some discussions next week, if that's okay.
Absolutely, that's music to my ears. Thank you, Vicky.
Okay, thanks for all of that. I don't know whether I'll just try and sum up where I think we are on this. Is there anything you want to say before I start that?
If I could just briefly, David, please. To me, it's really important that this is not resting on the way to the world's not resting on Jazz as the lead for this network. So we've got the IDEA committee, the Inclusion, Diversity and Equity committee, where all the leads of the networks attend, together with other key stakeholders in the organisation, and we'll be supporting the networks through that committee.
Okay. So anything finally you want to say, Jazz, before I sum up?
No, I just want to say thank you to Matthew and to you, Sir David, in terms of echoing the board's position and stance around your position on this, and also that zero tolerance, because I think that will speak volumes to the organisation, both to our staff and to patients. So thank you for supporting the reverse monitoring and mentoring as well, and the recruitment process, Matthew. That's really welcomed by the network.
Okay, just finally from my perspective, one of the things about all of this is that we all have to look at our own behaviours and what we do ourselves. And think about ways in which we can, by our actions, be more inclusive in the way we do things. And I'm doing that, and I'm sure all the members of the board are doing it. So, for example, for me, one of the things that I've said I'll do personally is First of all, I won't sit on a panel which is all white. When you look at the evidence around about people walking into an interview panel and seeing an all white wall facing them, it just creates the wrong perspective. So I've committed to that. I'm using members of the BAME network to help me where that's not possible to get a senior person to do it. So, for example, the appointment of the non-executive director and associate non-executive director, we're having a member of the BAME network on the panel to help us do that. I do think that the whole issue of reverse mentoring, as it's described, is an important one. Obviously, the executives are going to do it, but I think me as chair, I think I need to do it as well. And I'm sure other members of the non-executive community would say the same. So perhaps not in the same kind of way, but certainly a way in which it'll give us insight into what we do. As far as the board is concerned, I hope Jazz and people are watching this kind of recognise our commitment to getting this right. We want this organisation to be a place where people from a BAME background can flourish and actually can see it as an organisation they would want to work in, attracting people from outside as well as keeping the people that we have inside. We want to create an organisation where the people of the community see it as their hospital, their hospitals, and that the people from the BAME community in Worcestershire look to us as part of them, part of their community. Now, that's relatively easy to say, but incredibly hard to do. And one of the things I think we'll have to face is this is going to be a very, very uncomfortable road for us as we go through. One of the things about our culture is we want to open it up. We want to enable our connection with the board, between the board and the ward, between the board and the community to be much more open. And in that, we will have to accept the things that we're told, even if they feel uncomfortable. Now, the other side of that is that then we need to do things to make it better. Hopefully, we will do a lot of things to make it better. But one of the great things about having a BAME network and other networks similar is that they can hold us to account and remind us when we go off track. So just reiterate my thanks to Jazz for standing up. It's a very, lots of people will sit and grumble about this kind of stuff. It takes a particular kind of person who's prepared to stand up and do something. So genuinely, thanks, Jazz. I think Tina is absolutely right. You should not feel that the whole weight of the world is on your shoulders now. For all of that, we need to help and support you. And I think the kind of final commitment I'll make from the board is that, 2 or 3 times a year, we as a board should meet a broad group of the BAME network to consider progress and consider the things that we need to do going forward. So thank you for that, Jazz, and thanks for the commitment of all the members of the board to taking this really, really important set of issues forward, which will create, I think, an environment and a culture in this organisation which both our population will support and that our members of staff will recognise. So thank you. Right, let's move on now and talk about the board meeting that we have in front of us. It's a shortened board, so we need to move on and get stuff done. Are there any items of other business that people have got that are not on the agenda that they want to raise? No, good. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are there reasonable reflection of what we said there? Are people happy with that? Yes, good. Action log. Are there any outstanding actions, Kamara?
No, Chairman, and I have arranged the training as on the action list for the 10th of December. 10th of December training for dementia training and Mental Health Act training in the afternoon of the meeting on the 10th of December. And there's no other outstanding action, Chairman.
Okay. As many of you will know, Kamara leaving us at the end of the year, and she's been agitating us to do this dementia training since we had the staff and patient story on dementia. And I don't think she's going to leave until, she can't leave until we've done it. So thanks for keeping us on track with all of that, Mara.
Thank you, Chairman.
Let's move on then from the action log to the report from the Provider Oversight Committee. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the paper as read. Just a couple of additional points. Obviously, firstly, to note the decision to exit us from quality special measures, which I'm sure all board members will recognise as good news. Although, as I think I've said it during a number of briefings, it's the end of the beginning. As far as I'm concerned, we now push hard towards our continuing improvement on quality, performance, and finance, and there'll be no letting off in that regard. Two other points just to note in that. Firstly, I think a big thanks to all of our staff and all of our leaders, and a thanks from me to non-exec and executive colleagues for the fantastic effort and work that everybody's put in, whether it be through visiting the shop floor, whether it being supporting the delivery, leading the delivery, or indeed challenging progress when it's not where it needs to be. So I think that we mustn't forget the role of the board, along with the members of our fantastic staff that have been involved in this journey, as well as the role of system partners, colleagues at Health Watch, colleagues in local authority and so on that have held us to account along the way and made sure that they've been alongside us on that journey. I'm looking to system partners to continue to be working alongside us as part of the integrated care system. I've noted that David Hill, who's on the call, will be overseeing the system support package, which is almost now finalised and will be shared with board colleagues. And in doing so, I want to just, David, note a massive thanks to Fleur Blakeman, who has been our improvement director for the best part of 18 months or more. And she's moving on to pastures new, handing over to David. And I think it's right and proper that we note the huge contribution that Fleur's made alongside us in both supporting and challenging our progress. Fleur will continue to have a small amount of input on our task and finish group, which is focusing on our governance arrangements. But once we've concluded that work, I'm hoping by the end of the calendar year, Flo will be able to wave us cheerio as she goes on to help other organisations to improve. Happy to take any questions. I think the other thing just to note, I've sort of said I was going to say two things, I've now said five. The plan is to put a celebration event in at the beginning of December. And Richard, Tina and Lisa Marashenko are working hard on planning that at the moment, and more to follow in due course, Chair. So happy to take any comments or questions.
Okay, questions or comments? Well, I can say something anyway. If nobody else will. I mean, this is this is a historic moment for the organisation. This is a step out of a particular regime that we've been working in for some time, out into the, not quite the unknown, but certainly out into a place where we will have more autonomy and more, in a sense, work to do on our own, which I think is exciting and fantastic and a real boon for the organisation. I think it's a moment just to reflect on how we did it. And Matthew has talked about the staff. I would like to talk about the board. The board's done a phenomenal job over the last 18 months or so to lead this organisation to the place that it is in at the moment. And I'd particularly like to identify Matthew as the Chief Executive, who's provided, I think, exemplary leadership over this period to enable us to take this step forward. You can almost feel a book coming here, but I'm desperately trying not to do one. So I think, you know, well done, everybody. Congratulations for the fantastic work that we've done. And I would say that one of the things we've been very keen to do on this board, and I think it's reflected in our progress, is that we haven't tried to be too inward-looking. Very often when organisations, and I think this organisation has a history of it, when you come under pressure, you turn in on yourself. We've absolutely fought not to do that. And we would not have been in the position we're in today without the support that we've had from our system partners, from Health Watch, from NHS Improvement. But now we've got to make it in a much more independent way, which I think is great and reflects the direction that we're going in. So thanks everybody for all of that. But as Matthew says, this is the end of the beginning, and now we really do need to start to motor. In December, I will have done the first 2 years of my 4-year stint as chair. My objective within my 4-year stint was to get us to good and have a plan to deliver financial balance. I now believe, given the progress that we've made, that we should be outstanding by the time I finish my career. So let's accelerate our progress in relation to both quality and performance, and that will require an enormous coming together of us with our partners to enable it to happen. So I'm very excited about the next 2 or 3 years and what we can achieve in all of that. We still need critical. We still need to make sure that we don't let ourselves off the hook. That we tackle some of the difficult things that we need to tackle in the short and medium term, and we've got an agenda full of them here. But congratulations to everybody for delivering us out of special measures. Good. Let's move on then to the chairman's report. There's 2 actions here that I took with the CEO in relation to action. First one was the contract with Dolan Park, which is about getting work done in the independent sector. And the second one was the purchase of a third CT scanner, all about restoration. So both of those things were needed. They were time critical, so we can get on and get things done. And I asked the board to note those 2 actions. Right, so let's move on then to recovery and reset. Now, my guess is somebody, is it probably me, isn't it? Somebody, anyway, recovery and reset. Now, there is no doubt there are some issues in here that are also covered in the integrated performance report. So we just need to be careful that we don't have 2 discussions about all of this. But I'll leave it over to Joe, who's going to present this paper. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask that maybe you mute your microphone, because I think we're just next door to each other and it's probably causing the echo. Okay, thank you. So I'll assume, first of all, thank you, that we've all read the paper, and I'm just going to join in some of the discussion. Is that better? No, I'm not getting any. Can people hear me? I'm getting some nods. Okay, I will carry on. So just to summarise, this paper updates on the COVID position and our phase 3 submission, which takes us from September to March. Just to recall, we have a requirement as part of that to restart all of our services to previous year levels. We need to manage both the COVID surge and winter pressures, and we also need to take account of health inequality position, as you would expect, we're having detailed daily discussions with system partners and public health to monitor both cases and our escalation plans. Worcestershire is currently at level 1, but in the paper, as you will see, we sadly have to report that we've had some recent deaths due to the upsurge, which since September have numbered 9 deaths altogether. In terms of the recovery of services, then, we've outlined in the paper from an activity, workforce and finance position. From the activity perspective, we think the delivery of national requirements is not without its challenges, as we've outlined and noted, least of which is the long waiters. We've had to take on some additional temporary staffing to help with that recovery process. And from a finance position, you'll note the change to national arrangements, which takes us from block and top up to a fixed allocation for the remainder of the year. We also have a requirement to balance as an STP. You'll see that when the paper was written, there was a gap of some 26 million. Those discussions between Directors of Finance are ongoing and are continuing later this afternoon to see how we can close that gap. And you'll see that our part of that was some 7 million. Just to note as well as the phase 3 submission, we had to submit the NHS People Plan, which was done successfully, and that will come back to the People and Culture Committee in December. And all the planning assumptions that we put in the phase next year. So the remainder of the paper really just looks at some of the wider issues from a strategic perspective, one of which is looking at developing the ICS system model, which is proposed to be implemented in March next year. And there's a lot of discussion ongoing with the system in terms of what that might look like, recognising that actually some of the financial operating framework changes are yet to be communicated, but we'll update those as we have more information. So you're asked to note the report, but obviously happy to take questions from myself or colleagues.
Okay, Joe, thanks very much. I got about 70% of that. Some of it I didn't get. It's written in the paper anyway. I don't know whether it was just me or because I'm so close. But anyway, any questions or comments people want to make about the paper? Anita.
Thank you. Joe, just one question. Obviously, at the time when this submission went in, the regime that we were under was they were very clear, the centre, that if we didn't achieve certain levels of activity, there would be financial penalties in terms of not getting all the money. Since then, we've now in a sort of a rather different situation with COVID. Have the centre officially basically scrapped that idea, or is there a danger still that that we're now going to be penalised for something that's completely outside our control? Because presumably that's thrown a lot of these plans up in the air, or has the potential to do so, depending on how bad things get.
I think I'll hand that one to Robert if you're happy to take it.
Yeah, I did put my hand up there, Joe. I think the response to that is, as part of the plan submission we've done, any risk of penalties has actually been calculated, but has actually been placed as a memorandum in the return, which I think may give an indication that obviously this is still under consideration. We've received nothing formal to say that that will not be applied, but I think that in itself gives an indication of the thought process that says, when, you know, at this stage it's unclear how this will work, particularly in the current environment. Anita, I think that.
Thanks, Robert. Any other questions? Okay, I mean, some of the issues I guess I want to raise up will probably more sensibly appear in the integrated performance report. I mean, on the question that's just been raised about the national financial regime, I think the way Robert's described it is the best way to think about it. in terms of this is a memorandum that shows the implications of it if it happens. I personally believe that there's absolutely no chance it will happen if we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic. It's ludicrous in the circumstances to when if an organisation is desperately trying to treat COVID patients, keep its intensive care unit operating, and to do that we need to reduce services in other areas, that somebody will come along and take our money off us. Let them try, as far as I'm concerned. So whilst the decision hasn't been made, I don't think we should get ourselves too excited about that. On the financial point, though, I do think what's really important here is that, you know, the way in which we're going to be funded for the rest of the year is basically on an expenditure basis, which is a completely new thing, not happened in the NHS since 1974. A very new thing, and is, while we may have issues with the calculations, it could make a very significant difference to our financial health going forward. So it's really important that we deliver what we say we're going to do in terms of financing for the rest of this year. And we need to make every effort to ensure that we can live within the amount of money that we've been allocated for the rest of this year. It's a unique opportunity for us to show that we can do it. Okay, let's move on then. Thanks for that. We'll note that. Let's now move on to the integrated performance report, which I know we will cover some issues that relate to the restoration. So, Vicky.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the integrated performance report for month 5. Colleagues will note that it's the complete new style of report, which we partly trialled last month. So this has been through all of our various sub. In terms of the style and format of report, I believe it's been relatively well received. We continue to refine and strengthen and enhance, taking into account everybody's feedback to ensure that we kind of do answer the exam questions. So how are we doing at a macro level? We've identified 5 key areas of challenge, one which we've just talked about really, which is the restoration of services as we go through and we meet the challenge of that second part of COVID coming through. The emergency access standard and how we will continue to perform around that during the winter period, using the Home First Worcestershire Board as the vehicle for monitoring, managing and tracking that performance. Maintaining high standards of infection prevention and control, and improving our sepsis bundle, which I'm sure Mike will talk about. And then our 5th challenge, as we've just briefly touched on, is the finance picture and how that's beginning to change as we start to go into this new way of matching expenditure through the next period of time, and whether we will ever see a return to that PBR regime, which we've all become very familiar with. So I'll probably hand over to my exec director colleagues, and probably Paul first, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm talking to myself again. So, Paul, sorry, go on.
Okay, I'll just pick up on a few key points. Just one thing in the report, on page 2 of the report, it talks under the COVID restoration, there's a reference there to the nationally developed clinical validation exercise. That has gone slightly on hold since it was announced, because I don't think the implications were fully understood. So for us, we have just over 12,000 patients on our inpatients and day case waiting list. And if under the original proposals, every one of those would have to have been clinically validated, that would have taken round about 3,000 hours, or the equivalent of 80 consultants taken out in order to do that validation, which is something we raised through colleagues in the region. And earlier this week, the approach has been changed quite dramatically. So we're just waiting for final confirmation on how we should handle this, but it looks likely we will be requested to write out to all patients, but that not all patients will now need a clinical validation. So there's just been a change there for the board to be aware of at national level. In terms of the key points, I think what I would say is that on cancer, we continue to push to reduce the long waiters. I think colleagues will recall we hit a high in June of 196 patients waiting over 104 days. So there's been a lot of focus on that. And as you can see from the report, at the end of September, that number is now 57. And we continue to drive, and we're committed that that number will be 0 by March 2021. So progress is being made there. I think the other area I'd pick up on is activity. So I reported in August, and now again you can see in September, our attendances in ED are running at the same level as last year, and our ambulance conveyances are actually up by about 300 this month compared to last year. Overall performance against the 4-hour standard puts us in the top third in the Midlands region now, which is a significant progress. And the two things we monitor are obviously the overall 4-hour performance, which currently at the end of September, as you can see from the board paper, stands at 88.68%. The same position at the same period last year was 76.7, so you can see a 12% improvement. But I think what's more fundamental is if you look at the type 1 performance, that's actually what's going through our emergency departments. And for the April to September period last year, that stood at 64%, whereas this year it's at 85%. So a huge improvement by colleagues in the team. And I think the only other thing I must point out to board members is that as you'll see from the report, the number of patients waiting over 52 weeks and the overall size of the waiting list continues to grow. Colleagues will be aware that pre-pandemic, we had no patients waiting over 52 weeks. And at the end of September, that number is now 1,421. And at the start of the pandemic, our waiting list size was just over 35,000. And it now stands, as you can see from the report, at 40,160. So I think those are the key points that I would raise. A lot of positives on cancer and for our performance, but a real concern is the overall waiting list and long waiters continues to grow. I'm happy to take any questions on that part of the IPR.
So that's the first 2 points that Vicky has made, the one about the restoration of treatment services and the meeting our emergency access standards. Are any questions about those two things before we move on to the others? Anita.
Thank you. Just on what Paul just said, I mean, obviously we understand that the waiting lists have gone up, and and we understand the reasons for that. How assured are we that our process of harm reviews for those patients that are now having to wait much longer periods of time for treatment, how confident are we that we are assessing and making sure that patients aren't coming to harm because of it, or that we're minimising that harm? And I accept that's probably not a question for you, Paul, it might be for Mike, but get some assurance on that. Thanks.
Okay. I'll come to you, Mike. Are there any other questions in relation to this first part? Julie.
I mean, my question was similar. Are we somehow triaging the waiting list to make sure that people who A, could deteriorate, B, have got more life-threatening conditions, are prioritised over others?
In relation to Julie's question, the answer is yes. There's a clinical triage of all patients, which is one of the reasons we questioned what was initially required around the national clinical validation, because we have been triaging the patients. I can assure you that we are absolutely clear that our focus is on emergency patients and then category 2 and 3. So the more complex and more serious elective work plus the cancer work. And to be frank, because of that has been our focus throughout the pandemic and remains it, that has led to a growth in the waiting list. As I said, it's just over 12,000, but of those 12,000 patients on the waiting list, nearly 10,000 of those are routine patients. So our focus is on the more serious cases, but we are working and developing further plans now to try and increase the amounts of routine or category 4 surgery that we can undertake. And I'll update the board more in November on how we're going to do that.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that our harm review process is very robust. I mean, there are challenges in some of the areas, such as ophthalmology, where it would be impossible to check every patient. So we're checking samples. We're routinely checking every long waiter to make sure we're not causing any grief. And to date, we haven't found a significant problem. There's been one raised that we're reviewing, somebody with ureteric stones who developed sepsis as a consequence of a UTI that we're looking into. But other than that, nobody's been flagged up as having come to harm. My suspicion is there will be a few, because particularly the long waiters on the ophthalmology side and some of the orthopedic patients who get into severe difficulties with their joint problems will flag up at some point. But at the moment, no life-threatening issues have been identified or any significant harm so far.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And just before we move on to the next bit, Bill, you've been looking at the harm reviews at QGC?
So we have, and I'd echo Mike and Mike's comments around the rigour in which we're performing harm reviews, and to our eyes at the committee, we're watching very carefully. I think one of the challenges is just the magnitude of this problem, so that we're having to sample ophthalmology. If we see the growth in those waiting, we're going to have to sample other specialties as well, rather than seeing them all. So it is a huge challenge, but QGC has a very close eye on making sure it's properly conducted.
Thanks. I've got a question from Richard.
Yes, thank you, David. I may be coming from a different angle here. I understand the pressure on the waiting list, and I note the progress in ED performance compared to last year. But I also see increasing pressure on ED performance in the last couple of weeks. And with winter coming, that will increase further. So I'm more concerned about are we not restoring services too fast and impacting our ED performance through that, and how we manage that. We had a bit of that discussion in FPC. I think it's still important to maybe repeat some of it here.
Okay, Paul.
So in terms of if we take the Worcester site, then the overall performance has reduced during late September, early October. But what we have on the Worcester site is we have simply one ring-fenced ward, which is Akenbury 1 of 20 beds that we use for the complex elective patients, predominantly vascular and cancer, that cannot be undertaken anywhere else, either within the trust or in the independent sector. So I don't believe the work that we're doing on the Worcester site, the elective, is having any impact on emergency performance. If you look at other aspects of the emergency performance in terms of 1 hour ambulance handover delays, our performance there is now one of the best in the region, having been the worst. And again, if you look at the first 6 months of this year compared to last year we had 2,190 1-hour ambulance delays. This year we've had 138. And if you look at the 12-hour performance, the same period last year we had 410 12-hour breaches. This year we've had 5, and of those 5, 4 were clinically appropriate, but they still classify as 12-hour breaches. But it would have been inappropriate to move those patients out of resus. So and the plans that we are developing that I referred to earlier is looking to create a more hot and cold site distribution so that we can maintain elective activity and actually increase it on two of our sites, whilst kind of increasing capacity for our emergency patients, which I think we will need to do as we are now getting nearer to the position where we will have to start redesignating more wards as cohort and COVID positive as the numbers start to increase. And at the moment we currently have 13 patients in our beds, which is small compared to the peak of 141. But that number has been doubling. That has gone from an average of 2 for about 30 days to 13 in 10 days.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to Paul's response, Richard, I think one of the key elements of all of this is the extent to which we can ensure that no patient that needs to be in hospital is in hospital any longer than they need to be. And I think this is an area where we were really, as a system, absolutely brilliant in the first peak at enabling patients to be discharged in a really timely fashion in line with the national guidance. And you can see on the graph that shows readmission rates within 28 days that actually it didn't increase significantly at all, and it's pretty flat line readmission rates through that period. I think it's fair to say that we're working very hard with system partners to emulate that fantastic compliance with national discharge guidance, and that's going to be crucial to continue throughout the winter to mitigate the risk of emergency access being impacted unnecessarily by increased numbers of admissions, or indeed any elective activity that might be being delivered on the Alex or the Worcester site. So I think that's also an area where the Finance and Performance Committee will want to ask on progress as the integrated care system is, and the A&E delivery board for the county. But I think that's the crucial bit. If we can keep the performance on discharge processes, and that's down to us and our processes and our partners, that will mitigate some of the risk that we experienced in previous winters, where patients that were medically fit for discharge were in beds when they had no designated reason to be in an acute bed.
Okay. Any other points on that? Shall we move on then to talk about the infection prevention sepsis? Mike, Vicky, you want to talk about this?
Okay, if I just start off very briefly on the infection control, obviously, as Paul has outlined, the context of second surge in COVID provides the complexity of making sure we're very focused on all aspects of infection control. I think you'll note in terms of the level 4 non-COVID level of assurance has gone up from the level 3 the last time we reported, and the COVID related levels of assurance remain at level 6. I think the key issues to bring to the board's attention are the MSSA cluster, which we had a cluster in June and July, but had some in August as well. So we're at a level, a number 9 against a threshold of 10. And we've got an action group in place led by Tracy Cooper, who's our DIPSI. We've got really good engagement and scrutiny of the actions that are required, but importantly, the lessons in terms of the shared learning, we need to make sure that the frontline teams are actually deploying those actions and rapidly putting in the actions required to make sure that we don't have any further cases. So I think I'll just pause on that, because I think that during August, the only point to make out is that we haven't had any COVID-related hospital-acquired cases, and that's an important issue to note. But happy to take any questions, particularly on any of the indicators for infection control.
And Mike, do you want to say something about sepsis?
Yeah, so outlined in the report, on 4 of the 6 targets, we meet it very well. The 2 we don't, we're trying to establish exactly why that's not happening. So specialist medicine are doing a real-time review of all of their cases to identify with the individuals as to why they're not completing it. And surgery is doing a prompt, so they're putting in to all of the blood culture bottles, dual lactate now reminder slips. And hopefully from that we'll get some learning as to why people are not completing those components. There is going to be an audit done by Mike McAllister and one of the medical directors from Sunrise to look at particular aspects of this, now that Mike and the team are back on the ward supporting the juniors and the staff in doing this. But just for reassurance to the board, our HSMR for sepsis is reasonable. I'm not in the slightest bit complacent, but I think we have some assurance that the key components are being delivered and we are not causing major patient harm. But we will continue to focus on this to improve those figures.
Okay. Bill, do you want to say anything from a QGC perspective on infection or sepsis, and sepsis, sorry?
That would be great, David. I think, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Vicky and Tracy on actually the progress they have made in the last 6 months around infection prevention control, and the rigour in which they've tackled the issues is commendable. Our concern that we will remain vigilant for is around antibiotic stewardship. COVID has thrown up a significant problem in managing antibiotic prescriptions because patients present with features of infection which may or may not be bacterial and may or may not require antibiotics. So we recognise there's a new clinical challenge in there, but it appears that now the antibiotic stewardship group is maturing, and I hope will be seen to bear fruit and actually manage that particular component of the plan. In terms of the sepsis 6, this has been one of our challenging, I'd say, wicked issues for some time. I am concerned that our reliance is on intensive care staff to look after sepsis, given that I expect a second wave of COVID. And we need to make sure that robust systems exist, which will not be dependent on one person's shoulders, which is Mike McAllister at the moment. So while Mike is working through the data and trying to determine how best we redesign the recording of sepsis 6 data, I think we've got to be cognizant that we can't leave it reliant on an individual to deliver that. I think the good news is that the challenge that QGC has put in has focused also on learning to inform the future digital care record, which I hope will make the lessons we learn now make the design of that system better and more manageable, so that we record our actions more effectively as we go forward. So the committee has a very clear view of both of these issues and is supporting the executive in, I think, doing the right thing. And I'm very pleased with the progress that's been reported.
Thanks, Bill. Mike?
Well, just to say, we have had reluctance to engage on sepsis 6 before, but I think actually the fact that surgery and specialist medicine have stepped up to actually take responsibility is a really useful point, and I think it's good going forward, but it's not all on Mike now. So that's an important step, I think.
Okay. Well, in a sense, the you know, if the performance improves, then all of this will be working, and that'll be great. So that's the thing we need to look for. I'm sure QGC will continue to oversee it. I'm sure Mike and Vicky will continue to put the effort in to make it happen. Okay. Any other questions or comments in relation to all of this? Okay, let's then move on to finance. Robert. Are you there, Robert?
On another screen at the same time, which is got you on one screen and the finance on another. At month 5, we can to be spending less than our financial framework, and that's good news. So we've had a year-to-date position where our deficit in the month was 6.5 million against a plan of 8. That, of course, is topped up to make sure that we're breaking. The comparisons, of course, are difficult because of very different activity levels, but that's a positive position. In terms of incremental costs, which are included in that spend, COVID-19 remains stable at about 1.3 million, and year to date we've spent 7.6 million. So we continue to have favourable expenditure variance against the internal budget and the year to date. That's despite the as I said, the COVID. What we are just looking ahead, though, we are looking at obviously seeing an upward trend as the trust bed base increases and the services restart. So I think that's just a note for looking at it. But the critical thing that we are trying to make sure we do is that we are keeping tight control on all requests for temporary staffing, even though we recognise that short terms. That's the summary, Chairman.
Okay. Okay. Any questions, comments on the financing? Yes, Colin.
Thanks, David. Just picking up the point Robert just made, we've had a lot of discussion around the need to enhance our resources to match the activity demand that we're going to have, and the risks associated with trying to gear up. I think we said we needed something like 32 staff. What's the current thinking on how manageable that is, and whether or not we might be pressed to paying premium rates or other more drastic measures to get the people that we need in the door, through the door?
Okay. Is that one for Tina to have?
Thank you, Colin. Basically, what we're looking at is the staff escalation policy, both internally and across the system. So it's about how we manage the market for the temporary workforce, and that therefore we're not driving increased costs or increased hourly rates, and therefore having trigger points of when we have to redeploy staff across from other services. So that's our main focus, is agreeing what those rates, the cap will be, and then both the internal and system-wide escalation plans.
Okay, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I guess this follows on from Colin's comment, just to add to Tina's point. I mean, I think Colin rightly is pointing to this challenge around overall resources, because of course we're still in incident management mode, whilst trying to get business as usual activity levels and prepare for winter, and all of that, as I think Richard alluded to in his question, is a challenging thing to manage on existing resources. And I think one of the things that we've been talking about, we had as an executive team away day on Monday, was this very issue of how do we manage all of this complexity and activity all at the same time, and we can't do it on our own. So this question of the workforce, I think is one example, as Tina alluded to. We know that we pay more in Hereford and Worcestershire per whole-time equivalent than other parts of the system. I'm sure that's partly to do with the rural nature of the counties, but it's probably also to do with the fact that, you know, Wye Valley had been in special measures, we've just exited special measures, and it also may be that we're perhaps not looking at the workforce across our STP as effectively as we might do. So this question of redeployment, I'm keen to engage with system partners on how we look at the staff that we have across the CCGs, across the Health and Care Trust, or across social care, and our staff, and say, you know, if we've got particular pressure points in activity in certain parts of our county, how do we look at the overall medical, nursing, care staff, back office staff in a different way? And I think we're early in that consideration, but I think that's got to be part of the solution. We can't be constantly saying we need to recruit 30 extra staff or 100 extra staff, or wherever it might be, and expect them to be waiting in the forest, ready to come out and fill those roles. I think we need to look at the workforce as a whole across the patch. I think the other thing that we need to do, whilst we're looking to improve quality and performance and improve our financial health over the next 3 years, is take a hard look at whether certain things have to move out of the outside lane on the motorway, metaphorically into the inside lane, or potentially into a lay-by, whilst we focus on the real priorities from a patient perspective. So I think your question is well placed, Colin. I think we need to come back to it, but I do think we need to challenge ourselves on whether the workforce across the county is best deployed, and also whether the money is being spent in the best places as a consequence.
I think there's quite a bit of thinking we need to do as a board about how we're going to manage this financial aspect of the arrangement. I know it's connected to everything else, but I do think we need to spend a bit more time to get ourselves absolutely right on all of this. But it just seems to me one of the issues, when you're faced with massive complexity and extending complexity that we are, generally speaking, the idea is not to make it more complicated. And one of the things that we need to do, all the kind of doyens of this kind of activity tell us that you need some simple rules to enable people to do the right thing in relation to all of this. And those people who are committing resources need simple rules to apply. And I just think that as the executive gets through all of this, I just think you need to think about what those simple rules actually are that will guide the people who are deploying these resources to make the decisions that they are. Because the bit that we've got a restoration plan in terms of activity and in terms of waiting times, and based on a whole set of assumptions, we have that. We have a limit to the amount of money that we've got available over here. They're two, in a sense, stakes in the ground, in which everything else then will move. And unless we kind of understand what those stakes are and work them properly, we'll never be on top of how we're going to make this work. So, that would be my bit of advice in terms of how you deal with it. So we've got a restoration plan. We know how many patients we're planning to treat. We know the assumptions that we've made about emergencies and all the rest of it. And we've got a financial envelope to operate in. And there will be variations in all of that. Of course there will be, because of the COVID stuff and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, if you've got that stability there somewhere, you can then work from it. Richard, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, thank you, David. And again, this is something we did touch on in FPC, because on one hand, you're right, we need simple rules so people can just apply those rules. I think even more important is to not put them in the position where they cannot take another decision than to get additional resource from bank or agency, and which is all about the planning. And this is why the recovery and reset plan is so important, and why the executive team, even if they're in a very difficult situation of managing the incident as we speak, as well as planning for restoration, needs to really think, what do we restore when? Because when you've taken the decision, you know, the staff that's taking the operational decisions on the floor can almost not take a different decision than to staff it to the point that it's safe, yeah, because that's the way it works. And so it's really about the decision process on how we are going to restore, and looking at the different elements of the resources that are scarce. And the first resource that's scarce is clearly staff. We've identified that there's a huge risk in the overall plan, but there are other scarce resources in terms of beds and diagnostics. And if one of these doesn't work, you know, we end up in a situation where we put people to make decisions that they cannot avoid anymore. So I just wanted to make sure that that point is recognized, and this is where we need to put some of our attention.
Yeah, good point. Any other questions or comments? Matthew, do you want to just respond to that whole set of issues there?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I think I think all of those points are well made. I think the key for us is as Richard points out, getting the balance right between our right and proper need to reduce the waiting list, ensure the patients are getting treated in as timely a way as we can, whilst recognising that we need to do that with and through a workforce that is already quite fatigued from 6 months at least of managing an incident, when normally a major incident would only, you know, perhaps last a week maximum. So I think there is a real tension there. But I do think the route through this has got to be working across the county, and being, as David, you pointed out earlier in the meeting, being outward facing in our searching for solutions and looking for support, and making sure that delivery is in partnership with other colleagues. So that's the, you know, to some extent encapsulated the conversation we had in the last hour and a half of our away day on Monday, which is how do we more effectively work across the system to deliver what the system needs to do in terms of delivering good quality, meeting the needs of patients, but doing it within the financial envelope. And that's going to be the focus for the executive team over the next week or so, in trying to map out how we do that, whilst recognising that there'll be some things that we'll need to slow down on. I see Julie wants to just add a comment.
Matthew, I completely agree with that. Thank you. But have we got agreement for that? Because the trust can't turn away people who turn up at the doors. So I assume that, like at the start of the first wave, then we have an agreement that the minute a patient's ready for discharge, then community and social care are geared up to take them. But equally as well, that we need to make best use. I completely agree with you about staff are best deployed across the whole region, our whole partnerships. And is that in progress? That's an agreement that's going to be worked through.
So I think, Julie, the first point, there is agreement that we need to have no more than 10 across the 2 hospitals patients that has no reason to reside in our hospitals by the evening of each day. We're not yet getting to that number, but there is an agreement to do that. So this is more about operational processes, but there is agreement. On the second point, in terms of the workforce redeployment, myself and Tina in her role as kind of workforce director lead for the STP, and certainly for the county, is we're pushing that agenda to see if we can get agreements on that. So that is not yet in place, but I know discussions are underway.
Can I just have a follow-on, please, David?
Yeah.
In view of the fact that, you know, employment's in turmoil and that, are we working with HEE and the universities and colleges about increasing the numbers of people training for the pipeline further down? Substantially increasing, not the odd 1 or 2.
Yes, we've got, the university has got 200 additional student placements for nursing, for example. So yes, we are.
Sorry, Tina, have you finished? I couldn't.
Sorry, the reception here is terrible. Yes, in summary, yes, we are working with the universities on increasing places.
Okay. Okay, very good. I mean, look. Let's. There's quite a lot of work that needs to be done here. I can't get my thing working properly here. Anyway, there's quite a lot of stuff that's to be done here, and I think as a board, we want it all. You know, we want all of our patients to be treated. We want no deterioration in the services that they get. We want all of the COVID patients who require hospital treatment to be in here. We want all of the patients who are ready for discharge to be discharged. And we want to do it within a financial envelope. And we want it all, not because the government are telling us we need to, or that NHS improvement are writing letters to us or whatever. We're doing it because we think it's the right thing for the people of Worcestershire. That our focus on making sure that as we go through the next phase of this pandemic, that we try and keep as many of the generic services, whether they be cancer, whether they be diagnostic, whether they be elective, going as much as we can. And that is the kind of the drive behind all of this. And that is very hard to do. And I think that we would all recognise it. But we need to make sure we're doing it in a sort of organised way, which takes into account the plans that we have and the finances available to us. So as we work through all of this, I think it's really important, particularly, I guess, with Richard through performance and finance, through QGC, through people and culture, that we all play our part to support and enable this to this to happen. But no, and the final point I'd make is that I think that we've always needed here a medium-term financial plan. We've always needed here a real grip on what the underlying financial problems are, and we've always needed a broad plan to get us better back into some kind of order. And I think we just need to spend a bit of time as a board to just think all of that through, what the implications of that are as we go forward. Okay, well, thanks very much for all of that. We've got I don't know whether any, obviously, if there are things within the IPR that we've missed, that we don't think need to be, that we haven't covered here, please speak now or forever hold your thing. No, that's fine. We've got the committee's reports in here. Richard, anything you want to say over and above what we've already said on your committee report?
I think the most important items have been discussed, David. Thank you.
Okay, QGC. Bill?
I think the important topics have been discussed. I would, though, like to celebrate the improved mortality that we are seeing. Part of this is due to Mike's excellent work in improving the data, but I think it's important for the board to recognise that our HSMR is now no longer an outlier.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It is very good news, and obviously for the people involved. Yeah, well done, everybody. Thank you. Mark?
Very quickly, just 4 things I was going to mention, and they're all predominantly around staff well-being. Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, the Champions Network is now in place, and also they are liaising very closely to work with other networks, whether that be BAME, LGBT+, and indeed the Forward Advocates. So they're all acting in a similar area. Our flu vaccinations in the trust are going ahead, and there's a good, strong plan to get us over the 95% mark, and that is ongoing. And also there's strong plans in place now to improve the leadership offer that we make to our staff from top to bottom as to how they can climb the slippery leadership slope, so to speak. And we're trying to improve that and make it clearer to our staff. They were some of the main issues that were discussed at the last committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I just think we need to note that QGC received the Infection Prevention and Control Annual Report and the assurance in relation to neonatal cots and space in national COVID requirements. That we just need to note that was excuse me, that was done. Thanks for all of that remarkable amount of work done in all of that. We've now, in terms of the overall integrated report, I understand that there were 1 or 2 pages missing from it. I'm sure you all spotted that. Vicky will make sure that's all kind of put right. But what I would say about the report is this is the closest it's been since I've been here to being a good one. Not in the sense of the results, although the results are much better than we've ever had, certainly in the last 5 years. Well done, everybody. But also in terms of the coherence of the report and what it does. So thanks for all the work people have done. I'll never be satisfied, and we'll always be finding things that we want to change with it. But nevertheless, thanks for the work that people have put into this report. Very good. Let's then move on to Audit and Assurance Committee. Steve?
Thanks, David. I mean, you have the report. Nothing specific to add. The only thing, one thing is worth saying, I think, in terms of our data security and data quality, that's still progressing. It's always been, there have been 2 of our major issues over the last few years. With COVID, I guess we've seen a degree of slowdown, but actually we were very pleased that with data security and cyber security, we're actually making progress. And as you know, we have some funding which will support improvement in other systems. And I know Vicky's, the work we're doing in IT in terms of applications and in infrastructure is all very, very positive. And data quality, we have still got issues, of course, but actually the team are working hard and there's been some good progress.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the audit and assurance report?
Dave, can I just following on from Steve's point, just note for the board the phenomenal work that the information services team have done over recent months, particularly managing, increasing demands for COVID-related data and improving, the data quality, the data reporting, the timeliness, the IPR. I think it's just worth noting that this is a team that's well led within Vicky's division, and I know that they're on a real journey of getting to be as good as they can. So I think it's worth noting that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, thanks for that. We pass that on to your colleagues. Any other questions, Robert?
Chairman, Steve, there is a statement around external audits that's subject, I think, slightly.
Sorry, I missed the last part of what you said, Robert. I don't know whether everyone else.
At the committee, there's a statement that we around the external audit fee that actually has been left for me to continue to negotiate, as opposed to being accepted. It's just a minor amendment, because obviously it's a public paper.
Whatever they're asking, it's too much.
Yeah. Exactly. Always.
Always. Very good. Okay. Well, thank you. I think have I covered everything, Kamara? I've not missed anything else, have I? I'm not in any kind of trouble here. Okay.
No, that's fine, David. Thank you.
That's how we know all the business. So this is the end of the meeting. Peter, for you, Peter in particular, are there any questions or comments you want to make at the end of the meeting?
David, thank you very much for allowing me that. I don't know if many other people of the public would want to comment, but I wanted to give you some feedback on Soft Intel. We've been doing a lot of contact work across Worcestershire Health and Community, and my contribution, David, is Soft Intel. But I wanted to let you know that the general public, the people we're involved in, are behind you in what you're having to do and the challenges that you face, and the board today has indicated all those. If I'd got a general message that comes back, is to keep doing it, don't stop, and the integration that you've mentioned and the working together is very key to members of the public. They would be appalled if one individual organisation or one individual ego, stopped the work that you've got to do. I just want to pass that particular message on as a supporter. I know that's the way that you like to run things, but that's the way the public want you to run it as well, I'd say. I wanted to ask about the 12,000 letters that are going out regarding communication on why we're waiting and what the problem is. I just wanted to sort of emphasize that any time we communicate with the public, it is a real good opportunity to actually get a kind of factual message over and some of the points. And if you haven't already worked on the content of that letter, could I, and I'm sure Richard and his team will be doing it, is think about the messages that you want to portray to people. It is an opportunity, David, you shouldn't miss, really. We had some kind of feedback of people asking us what are or what might be the current visiting arrangement as the next COVID thing might come. So I wanted to let you know the public are raising that with us, and some clarification still on the end of life procedures should carers and people supporting others, need to be aware of everything else. Those are the things that have come back in the last 4 weeks, David, but excellent meeting today. And my message from Health Watch, as always, if we can help support you, promote things, help with any administration that's going on, please let us know. Thank you, David.
Do we want to, there are three things you dealt with there: letters, visiting, and end of life. Who wants to deal with letters? Or is this communicating with the 12,000?
Yeah, this is the validation, communicating with the patients on the waiting list. We can make some adaptations to the letter, but there are some very clear requirements on what needs to be included in the letter, because this is really around confirming, in the first instance, from a patient perspective rather than a clinical perspective, as to whether they wish to, that they feel they still need the procedure that they're on the waiting list for. So I'm sure we can add a couple of points to it, but we need to be careful that the patient doesn't misunderstand the letter or doesn't get the clear reason for writing to them, so that they can respond to us.
That's fine, but if you could talk to Richard, perhaps between the two of you could communicate with Health Watch about making that happen. Richard.
David, just to reassure Peter, we're using this as an opportunity to review what information we've got available online about arrangements for inpatients, outpatients and visitors. So that review's underway at the moment. So even if we hopefully have some updated information that we can signpost people to by way of additional reassurance.
And the end of life stuff?
David, if I could come in, please. I think Peter will know that we've been working through a risk assessment process for visiting. We've got an SOP in place, Peter, and I know we've just received in the last couple of days some revised national guidance in terms of visiting. I think we've certainly worked, there's been a national campaign very much about maternity visiting that you'll know about. We've got a very good arrangement in place for the flexibility that's required for that visiting. And we will particularly focus on end of life, but our SOP at the moment focuses on compassionate visiting to make sure that actually each of the ward managers have the discretion to be able to allow the visiting based on whatever the circumstances are, whether it be dementia, learning disability, or the individual circumstance, as well as the end of life. I think what we do, Sir David, need to focus on is reviewing again, back to Richard's point about the communication and making sure the public understand that. And so we'll take that in hand with the latest national guidance.
Thanks, Vivian. Okay, let's so thanks everybody for all of that. I take the point you make Peter, we will take them away. Just in reflection on your first point, I think one of the key things about successful organisations, and hopefully increasingly this one as well, is the whole thing about consistency of purpose. You know, we've set out what our purpose and mission is, and we're consistently going to do this. We're not going to be put off by, you know, short-term things that affect us. We're going to be absolutely focused on putting patients first. So thanks very much, everybody, for all of that. That's the end of the meeting in public. Kamara, what time do we have to reconvene for the private thing? Are we going to have 10 minutes off now, or what do you think?
Yes, may I suggest we reconvene at midday, Chairman?
Okay, we'll reconvene at midday.